Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Dojo Live show of the week. My name is Kim Lantis, and it's my pleasure to be co-hosting along with America Guerrero today, this Tuesday, January 24th. Hey,
Hello, hey.
All right. And of course, the guest of honor, the most important person of today's show is Tim Panagos, who is the CTO and co-founder of MicroShare. Tim, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Kim in America.
Yeah, you're up north in the northeast there, outside of Boston, fresh snow on the ground. Much warmer inside than outside, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely. It's sun is shining though, and the sun makes it look pretty. Makes the snow look pretty rather
I
than
love the
oppressive,
sparkles.
so.
I do. And here I am in Mexico, and I'm the one with the coat on.
Wow.
You know, surprisingly, our buildings don't have heat or don't tend to have heat. So I think we're in the 50s today, 60s. So it's chilly. You need that coat. It's really weird.
If you have to sit in the 50s, it does feel cold. So I can appreciate that.
Perfect. So Tim, we're not here to talk about the weather. We're actually here to be talking about data ownership and everything that's happening in this age of digital transformation. But before we get into the specifics of that, we would love to know your story a bit better. Who are you, your passion, and kind of what led up to this founding of MicroShare?
Sure. So I'll try to give you the quick version of all this. I left college really interested in the field of AI. And right now, you'd say in 2023, obviously you were interested in the field of AI, but this was back in the early 90s. And those who haven't really been tracking AI for very long, there was a boom-bust cycle in artificial intelligence that happened in the 80s. And by the early 90s, it was really a bad word. People didn't believe in AI. The hype had turned into disillusionment. And that first wave of AI really led
and Terminator 2 did not help, I'm sure.
No, it certainly didn't. And you're right in that this is the time frame we're talking about, right? It was demonized and yet not recognized as a viable commercial technology. But I was a sci-fi buff, and I just couldn't let it go. And I really thought, this is the technology of the future. We've got to be able to figure this out, and it really is a matter of time. So it was naive of me to think, well, all they need is a talented engineer like myself, and we'll finally get this AI thing going. So I really cast about for a place that was still taking AI seriously commercially in the early 90s. And there were really only a few places that were doing true AI. And it turns out that most of them were doing it in the realm of banking. So like all boys, I dreamed of becoming a banking software engineer. But that's where I had to go in order to really pursue artificial intelligence in a real commercial context. And so, I ended up spending probably the first 15 years of my career building financial services software and really learning how financial services thought about technology and how we could incorporate advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, data analysis in those particular fields. So I wouldn't have chosen that by any means, as a little boy saying this is what I want to do. In fact, my first job, I wanted to be a garbage truck driver. So maybe that'll still be a second
I wanted
career.
to be a paleontologist if it matters much.
Perfect.
Pirate, like Jack Sparrow. Guilty.
Perfect. So, second careers are all open for all of us. But, it turned out to be a good place to, in hindsight, looking back on a perfect place to start, because really the last 20, 30 years has been about the theme of digital transformation. And the first industry to go through digital transformation was financial services. And in a lot of ways, it was because they had a very compelling use case, a lot of ROI to digitally transform banking, a lot of money, obviously, in finance. And so solving those problems was really important to them. They saw a lot of return by their investments in digitization. And so it was a great place to kind of learn in digital transformation, that first wave, what worked and what didn't work, how to get value from it. And sitting here now, 25 years later, crazy amount of time to have gone by, but why we started Microshare and that sort of continuous is, we were doing $50 million projects in a financial services company to implement this digital transformation technologies, obviously well beyond the means of most businesses to fund that kind of project in order to digitally transform. So to me, it was really important to figure out, how do we take some of these really cutting edge technologies that were very expensive to implement and democratize them so that we could solve smaller, more niche organizations with still ROI, but perhaps less cash free to invest, could still get the value of digital transformation by taking these same technologies, same techniques, taking what we learned and figuring out how to apply them in smaller scales. So that's really was the inspiration for Microshare.
Beautiful. I love that story. Thank you. And so now that we're at this cusp of the Microshare story, what are you doing? What is the problem that you're solving specifically?
Yeah, so really it is continuous with that digital transformation story. What we have really focused on is measuring the real world, and I'll use a buzzword here, Internet of Things. Is the sort of buzzword that you'd probably bolt onto what we're doing at Microshare. And really specifically, we're using wireless sensors to measure what's going on in the physical world, to take that digital signal and use that to mirror what's going on in the real world in the digital space. And therefore be able to apply all these tools and techniques that we learned in banking to making better decisions about how to manage our physical spaces better. And it may turn out, Kim, that we loop back around and talk about the weather again, because it's an obvious item to talk about in the physical space, measurement of physical space.
It completely is, and I think it makes a lot of sense, not just because of where, for example, it's the same thing, but it's just the converse here. I live in Hermosillo, Sonora, Mexico. So the winter, it tends to be more comfortable, right, than the summer. But in the summertime, we're in high triple digits for months on end. And so we all take refuge indoors. And then, of course, you're the opposite of that, for several months. Everyone needs to take refuge indoors during the winter months. And so this idea of making the physical space much more comfortable for us is really important, but not just because of weather. I think even with COVID, for example, I think there must have been a lot of lessons learned. All of us are cooped up inside, and it's just this, I imagine this boom, and we can do better than this. How can we do better than this?
Yeah, I think that was right. We are celebrating basically our 10-year anniversary of founding this month. And 5 years ago, our growth path was very different than it is today. And of course, quarantine and COVID had a lot to do with that. And actually, I think was an accelerant. It certainly was a complicator, as I think for many people's businesses, for many people's careers, it was a complicant. But we very quickly pivoted into contact tracing when COVID first happened, leveraging our technologies in a new use case. And that was really rewarding, because we felt like there was a really important mission about measuring the interior spaces and people's proximity and usage of it as a means of managing, human safety. And that was really useful. And it's also a general paradigm, I think, for what we're now doing as we come out of COVID.
The opposite. Now we have all this space that nobody's utilizing.
That's exactly right. Ultimately, all of these things are tied in, right? Space is a commodity, but it is a scarce commodity. We're not making more Earth. So at the end of the day, it's really the principal natural resource that we need to worry about. And the way that people use that space, optimizing the way that people use that space, whether it's living or working or shopping or celebrating, whatever the human activity is, how well we match our usage to that scarce commodity. And then, of course, match for comfort and safety, and match for sustainability. So using just the right amount of resources to support the comfortable use of that space. It probably sounds complicated, and in fact it is, but there's a lot of dimensions that need to be considered when you think about managing a space well.
So many dimensions, and I think this brings us into what we talked about earlier, the IoT element, and I think it's a really good segue into the specifics of today's topic,
Sure.
which is data ownership and the age of
Yeah.
digital transformation. The question we're trying to answer today is what, America?
Where is the line between surveillance and sensing, and why does it matter? I remember that here in dojolive we had a show that with the company that they also provide IoT sensing services, but applying to healthcare, and it made a lot of sense to help people with this kind of technology. So what else? What else could you share with us?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think IoT has been around. Not everybody's aware of it as a specific buzzword. They might not be able to point and say, oh, that's IoT, or define it. But I think it's now kind of in the, at least commercial language fairly well. And we have examples in our home lives that are smart refrigerators and smart thermostats and, like it or not, the things we carry in our pockets probably
Alexa.
are also Internet of Things connected devices. So it is part of our life and will increasingly be so. So, one of the things that we worried a lot about early on was how not to use this technology to increase the surveillance state and to use the data for what I think is really important, which is managing our lives more comfortably and more sustainably. For me, this is actually the ESG, particularly the E and the S. It's about making sure we're conserving natural resources, energy and air and water, while maintaining a fair and equitable comfort for the participants. So I think it's really important that we have good data in the space, but I think it's quite natural for people to push back and wonder, what are you doing with the information that you're collecting about me? And I feel very differently about the laws and regulations we've put in place to mediate digital interactions, right? How you're using social media, what websites you're visiting, how you're shopping online. I think a lot of people have gotten up in arms in that, but then if you graft that into the real world, to me that just ups the ante in terms of concern of a legit misuse of this kind of information. Because for my mind, you may not feel this way, but I feel like I always have a choice of whether to engage in a social network or to shop online, and I can refuse if I'm really worried that my data will be misused. But the real world, it doesn't work like that. You need to go out shopping. You need to go meet friends. You need to take your children to work. And as you do that, you're transiting through space, and you may or may not be aware, you're being measured by a lot of different entities in a lot of different ways. And you don't really have a choice of whether to go down this street or whether to shop or not, because it's about survival. And to me, that's different about the real world measurement and the digital world measurement that I think really creates a much more important to be respectful of human rights in data collection in the real physical space.
And I mean, that's completely true. And I think in some ways we as people have become either numb to it or don't even think about how much we're actually surveillance. And then when you merge that with the digital world, just this morning I was watching, you roll over in bed and check the alarm clock and like, okay, I'll go on Facebook for a minute.
Which turns into many minutes.
Yeah, many minutes. But there's a video of these two dogs in a coffee shop, and one of the dog attacked the other dog. And so because of the video that they had at the coffee shop, they're able to find this guy who's just ran away with his dog, right? Who didn't want to, anyway. So it's like, but you can't go to get coffee without being recorded. And in this case, that's a good thing, right? Because in the end, justice prevailed, or whatever you might want to think. But I think we've become so numb to this or don't even realize, right? This walking down the street, I mean, traffic cameras taking photos of our license plates.
Right.
What happened? Like, why is this so okay with us? Or is there any going back, or what needs to shift?
Yeah, I think you said a couple of things that are really important in there. We're busy. Our attention is already consumed, right? If these hadn't crept in, maybe we'd have a little more time to spend looking around us. But everybody's consumed with their daily existences and the challenges that exist we're in. And the reality is, people just can't be asked to be aware of everything that's going on at every moment. And, in times of crisis, you will focus on the things that are generating that crisis. And, there may be in parts of the world a higher awareness of things like surveillance because they're closer to a potential crisis where surveillance might be used to threaten, their normal daily existence. And we're blessed, I think, to be in a time period and in a geography where we maybe don't have to worry as much. It isn't an existential threat, but that can change. Regimes can change, geopolitical situations can change, and the intent of the people collecting data who have access to that data, we may have been okay with a local regional player having access to our whereabouts and what we're up to, but the ownership of that data could shift really dramatically if somebody came in and seized that. We may not have a choice to say, you know what, take that camera down. Now I feel very differently about it.
Enter the handmaid's tale.
Exactly, and I don't like to be dystopian about it.
Right.
But try to be realistic about it. In which I think the industry and the government that deal in data collection really have a real burden that we should feel in terms of giving citizens access to the information so that they can control it before they really need it. So you might say, oh, it's great that I know the data is being collected and I could see it if I wanted to, but I'm not worried about it today. That's fine. I don't think everybody should spend all the day obsessed about what people are tracking on them. But awareness is important so that the education is there that, oh, these things that are blinking on the walls, these things that are glassy on the ATM machine or on the traffic light, they are collecting data about me. I think awareness is important so that it's in the open. And then I think accessibility is the other stage, that if I did want to know what you're collecting, there is a way for me to go see. So I think those are the fundamentals. At very least, we should be providing that to our citizens, whether they're employees in our office space or customers in our store or people who are just walking by the storefront, should have those basic rights established for them. And then the next level, of course, is once I'm aware and I can see, can I control? That's the next level down, providing some way of judging. As you said, a great example.
Opting out.
No, please go ahead.
I said like the ability to opt out, for example.
To opt out, at a course level, do this or don't this. But you used an interesting moral example of it was good they used this video to track down a wrongdoer. Okay, well, that's not opt in or opt out. It's saying you can use this information, this video in this case, which might capture my image, if you're using it for these following reasons.
Right.
Probably not for some other following reasons, right? If you're looking to interrogate people who may or may not have a different skin tone, then obviously none of us are going to want that video to be used for that reason. But in the purpose of preventing, stopping a crime, finding a missing person, then we should be able to do that. So I think what that shows is, yes, people have this intuition about you can use this data for some things and not for others. And then you think about, I'm using this gesture, giving you a knob and dial way of kind of tuning it into what your personal threshold would be. And this is one of the things that we built into MicroShare. It's why we're called MicroShare. It's the idea of sharing data at a very granular level, and most importantly, respecting the idea that every piece of data ultimately has more than one owner. It's not just the person who put the sensor up, but it's the people who are being sensed. It's the jurisdiction in which the sensing is occurring. All of these create this multi-dimensional environment for data ownership, which all basically says we all should have our own knobs and dials to say how we want that data to be used. And I think that's just, you can believe that for MicroShare and how we've implemented it, but I think everybody really needs to be thinking about how to respect privacy, how to give people that visibility and control.
It sounds like the fundamentals are like super solid. Let's talk about the sensing that MicroShare is actually accomplishing. I mean, we talked about surveillance in terms of video, but you did hints on a lot of other ways in which we're able to make our buildings more sustainable, greener, maybe even, I'm guessing, save money in terms of, you know what, the functionality of the people that you have here. You only really need 50% of the space. So if you were to able to shift your people to this side, you could rent out the other side, or whatever it might be. What are some use cases of what you're accomplishing?
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about IoT maybe is that they're, unlike the internet, which had a killer application right from the start, it was email. Everybody wanted email, and you couldn't not have email once you knew what email was. IoT doesn't really have a killer application that just drives everybody to consume. It's really made up of a lot of smaller individual use cases that add up to something quite large if you're able to kind of aggregate those smaller pieces. So in almost all of our customers don't have one use case, but they have 1, 2, or 3 use cases, all which can benefit from a common infrastructure, a common artificial intelligence background, a common mechanism for collecting, collating, and making decisions. So really common things like predictive cleaning is, through quarantine, was really popular and remains really popular. Am I cleaning spaces people are using, or am I wasting my time? So spend my time, spend my cleaning resources, use my staff's time where it's going to make a difference to human well-being, because cleanliness is about health, and it's also about comfort. You don't want to use a dirty bathroom. And what you find, particularly in these commercial buildings where occupancy has been very different than it was 3 years ago, you find people are still trying to clean things the same way they used to, which is, just go in a loop, just clean this floor and go up and down. And a lot of times people are cleaning spaces people aren't using when, they could be focusing on those places that people are using more heavily. And so,
yeah, I mean, I think if there's a shopping mall here, and inevitably the dirtiest bathroom is the bathroom that's nearest the food court, when it should be the cleanest.
Absolutely right. It should at least get the most focus, right?
Yeah.
And that's a perfect insight. I mean, we see this time and again in all the buildings I measure. The bathrooms on the first floor are always the worst. Always the worst. And you say, well, it's because people come in and out of the first floor, and they don't usually go to the 5th floor to use the bathroom. It's just very natural, right? And then you can see these patterns by 2 things. We generally will correlate in our cleaning use cases. It's usually usage. So we use an IR sensor, it's just infrared. So whether there's something warm moving around in that space gives us a proxy for.
Hopefully it's a human and not a rat.
And it's funny you say that, because Kim, we use the exact same sensor in a rat detection use case. We put that sensor in a rodent trap to know whether there's a rodent in that trap or not. And it is the same sensor, it's the same technology, just a different use case. But it's funny.
But I love that you're anonymous in that anyway. That's a really cool feature. America.
Yes, I'm curious because I can see on your website that there is Ever Smart, and you have different kind of products. And I'm curious how you pass from cleaning to cleaning air. With which product did you start? How was easier at the beginning, and what are the products that are getting difficult to build with IoT?
Yeah, I think, IoT being something that's new, and the kind of commercial real estate space, I think, is a classically underserved industry from a technology perspective. So a lot of this is education and providing technology where they're used to doing without technology. So for us, it's about educating our customers as much as it is learning how to pivot and scale up, a startup. So there's a lot of lessons here. We certainly have learned things the hard way in many cases, but that's really the interactive job we've been through. We built a horizontal capability for IoT. There are about 500 different sensors you can buy and snap on to microshare, and they measure everything you can imagine that is actually measurable. We work within an ecosystem of sensor vendors. We don't make our own hardware. And that opens a lot of possibilities when you have that horizontal capability, but people don't buy possibilities usually. Too many possibilities are overwhelming. It's like, well, I could do anything, but where do I start? What should I actually do? And so what we've had to do then from there, America, is explore specific people, what their persona is, what keeps them up at night, and what data and insight can we bring to them through some combination of those 500 plus sensors? What can we make real for them, and then build from there? And so, and I think COVID has changed that trajectory for us. Going into COVID, we found we were working a lot on asset tracking use cases. People who maybe in a hospital need to know where the wheelchairs are in the building, where are the medicine carts. People use them and they leave them where they were, and then they wander away. And nurses spend a lot of time looking for the medicine cart when we all know there's a shortage, and they, particularly in a quarantine, we know how busy they were. If we could cut out that time of just wondering where these assets are and give them a quick way to go find them, that started out really being where we went in the quarantine. Then contact tracing kind of took over. Very similar kind of technology. We're not worried about where the assets are, but we're worried about where the people are. And then from that, clean became important, because people are saying, well, if you want me to come into the space at all, you really ought to clean the surfaces. And then air was important, because we all knew then that the COVID was going to be transmitted through unclean air. So it did follow on from one experience into the other, and really kind of led us, I think, back around to the realization that all of these separate things we measure, sort of the common pole in all those tents, is how people use the space, is occupancy. Who's in this space and what are they doing? And if there's nobody in the space, we don't care about the air quality. We probably don't care about the temperature. Yep. We don't need to clean it if there's nobody there. But if there are people, then that's where we should spend our time analyzing and improving and optimizing. So that tends to be the commonality of all of our use cases. It's everything in context of human usage.
Nice. We're coming to the final few minutes of the show, but I wanted to get back to this idea of surveillance versus sensing. We've talked a lot about videos. You just started talking about infrared sensors. Yeah. What is some of this other stuff that you're utilizing in your software, the hardware that you're using in your software, to help maintain this privacy factor that might be important to people, right? Because you can tell that someone went in when there's an infrared sensor, but you don't know exactly who. And I think there's some, the privacy factor there. What other components are we intermingling? And again, why does that matter?
Yeah, Kim, so good, very good question. We tend to, at Microshare, we tend to steer away from sensors that have too intimate a knowledge of the end users, which means we don't do audio, we don't do video. But I think that's a point in time that's not sustainable, because clearly audio and video are already in the world. People are using these, and in the end, we probably will too, because I assert that with a really good microphone, there's almost nothing about the world that I can't tell just using the microphone and analyzing that with AI, that I really don't need these other sensors. And indeed, I think that's the track that we are all on, is right now, everybody's putting sensors on everything. And you look in your average conference room, I'm looking at mine, there's a lot of things on the walls, and there's a lot of things on the ceiling, and there's probably going to be more before there's less. But ultimately, what we need is fewer things, more general purpose sensors, and a better way to share the data. And again, maybe that tells you why we're called Microshare. It's not about more sensors, it's about fewer sensors and better ways of sharing the data to the people who ought to have access to make better decisions. But when you talk about surveillance and sensing, ultimately for us, yes, managing the hardware is important, but it's the data that really matters, right? Regardless of what the source of the information is, can I trace it back to you, Kim, to you, America, specifically? And if I can, then I want to be able to also give you visibility into the fact that you are being measured. And additionally, that next rung down, I also want to give you control to say, I want you to be blind to my activities in this space right now. Measure me tomorrow, but right now I want to be anonymous, and give you the ability to do that. So one of the practical ways we've done that is to put barcodes on our sensors that you can scan as a user when you walk into a space and you see a blinking light. You say, that's a sensor measuring me. Oh, it's got a barcode on it. I can scan that, and it gives you an interface that allows you to kind of see what's being recorded. You might be okay with that, and your curiosity is satisfied, and you go along with your day. But you could also say, oh, I don't want that. So I'm going to, as an end user of the space, turn that sensor off for the duration of my use, and it'll turn on again in an hour or something like that. But it gives you some simple ways to view, to be aware, to have visibility, and then to control. And we see that work really well in Europe. They have a more sophisticated, I think, mechanism of understanding data privacy and wireless technology. They're just ahead of us from North American perspective. We're a little behind. I think we tend to be a little more cynical of these tools. So I think culturally we see the rest of the world kind of leading in that direction, but I hope that North America will be the beneficiary of what we're learning in other parts of the world, and we can bring that forward.
Fantastic. Definitely interested in learning more about the share component and what we're doing with this data. We'd love to have you back on Dojo Live.
That's going to be thrilled to do it.
Yeah, because I mean, it's true. And I think going back to what you said at the beginning, I believe you said the democratization, right, of the digital transformation, which I think makes a lot of sense. And particularly here in North America, the cynicism, and even just to protect us from ourselves. Like if you think of individuals that, 5G and all these weird theories that get thrown out there, it can ultimately hurt people, right?
It does.
And so it's great to be able to have that freedom and increase, right? What were the two A's you used at the beginning? The awareness as well as the accessibility, and then the ability to control that to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I think, back to the weather, the sunshine kills a lot of bugs, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is the issue at the core of the culture, is without the sunshine of awareness shining in this space, then people will invent the worst case scenarios in their own minds, and they invent these. And in some cases, they're not wrong, right? In some cases, they are being surveilled, and this data is being misused. It's better that they really understand, because we've got true scrutiny where it belongs. So this is why I talk about this idea of surveillance versus sensing, because sensing will help us as a species make better use of our resources and live happier lives, safer, longer, and more comfortable. I believe that thoroughly. So could we opt out now? I think it's probably too late. You asked that earlier, but I don't think we should opt out. It could make our lives better, but we do have to really take care of that potential downside risk by making sure light's shining on the activities of data usage.
For sure. And then having that collective ability to do something about it. Instead of all of us individually worrying about something that is really insignificant, we can better identify and push forward.
Right. We all have our favorite watchdogs, I think. It might be the EFF if you're a nerd, but there are going to be, if the data is accessible, if people can see it, then there will be advocacy groups that probably do the detailed work of looking and understanding and reporting back to us as individuals. We probably will never really have the need individually to go into that. But that's what we want, right? We want the ability for the individual to see, but then we may trust other people. But trust but verify, I think, is a really good policy here.
I love it. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Tim, we're coming to the we actually are at the end of our show. I think you've created some amazing insight. We've definitely enjoyed our conversation with you today. Congratulations on what you and Microshare are accomplishing. And yes, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, America.
Yeah, stick around for just a minute as we go off air. But before we do, we'd like to share what we've got coming up for the rest of the week.
Yeah, the rest of the week or just tomorrow, Kim?
We can go ahead and do this tomorrow because we're actually a bit over time.
Okay, because I wasn't ready for the whole week. But yeah, tomorrow we're going to have at 10 a.m. Pacific a show with Sunil Madhu. He is the CEO at the company Instant, and the topic is going to be about arbitraging. Yeah, correct? Arbitraging and securitizing fraud risk in the market. How do today's businesses manage fraud and compliance risk, and why are such approaches causing financial exclusion for the future demographic? Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Thank you again, Tim, and we'll see you all here at 10 o'clock. Bye for now.